The distortion of Nietzsche's philosophy began even before his death, primarily due to the influence of his sister, Elisabeth Förster Nietzsche. A staunch nationalist and outspoken anti-Semite, she manipulated his unpublished writings to align with her own ideological beliefs. Upon taking control of his literary estate after his mental collapse in 1889, she selectively edited his notes, misrepresented his personal letters, and arranged his unfinished ideas into what was later published as The Will to Power. This book, often mistaken as Nietzsche's magnum opus, was in reality a fragmented collection of thoughts, heavily altered to support reactionary ideals, contrary to his own philosophical stance. Elisabeth's efforts culminated in the creation of the Nietzsche Archive in Weimar, which became a gathering place for nationalist intellectuals, including admirers of German militarism and authoritarianism. She personally welcomed figures like Adolf Hitler, strengthening the false connection between Nietzsche's philosophy and fascist ideology. In reality, Nietzsche had vehemently criticized German nationalism and anti-Semitism. He disapproved of his sister's marriage to an anti-Jewish agitator and had openly mocked the growing wave of anti-Semitism in Germany, writing in a letter, "I am just as much opposed to anti-Semitism as I am to nationalism." This historical manipulation had grave consequences. By the time of the Nazi rise to power, Nietzsche's ideas had already been hijacked. His concept of the Übermensch, a self-overcoming individual who creates new values, was twisted into a justification for racial superiority and fascist ideology. Likewise, his will to power, originally a theory of creative force and personal growth, was reframed as a doctrine of conquest and dominance. Though serious scholars have since debunked these misinterpretations, their impact lingers in popular culture, continuing to shape the widespread but false perception of Nietzsche as a philosopher of brutality and immoralism. Nietzsche's ideas were also misread in the broader intellectual climate following World War II. With the horrors of fascism fresh in global memory, many intellectuals viewed any critique of morality or universal truth as potentially dangerous. Nietzsche's challenges to Enlightenment rationalism and Christian ethics seemed unsettling in a world seeking stability after catastrophe. As a result, his nuanced exploration of values was often dismissed as reckless or even harmful. However, the resurgence of interest in his work, particularly through scholars like Walter Kaufmann, helped reclaim Nietzsche's philosophy from these distortions. Kaufmann painstakingly demonstrated Nietzsche's opposition to anti-Semitism and nationalism while highlighting the complexity of his critique of morality, laying the groundwork for a more accurate understanding of his work in contemporary times. Thus, the public perception of Nietzsche as a dangerous, nihilistic thinker is more the result of historical accidents, ideological distortions, and selective readings than an accurate reflection of his philosophy. Beneath these layers of misrepresentation lies a body of thought that is far more intricate, one that does not celebrate the destruction of values, but instead calls for their transformation in the face of modernity's challenges. Beneath the layers of misinterpretation, Nietzsche's actual philosophy is far more nuanced and thought-provoking than its distorted public image suggests. His infamous declaration, "God is dead," is often mistaken as a triumph of atheism, but it was not a celebration, it was a warning. Nietzsche recognized that the decline of religious belief in the West would leave a void in meaning, a crisis that could lead to either nihilism or the rise of new, rigid ideologies. He did not advocate for a world without values. Rather, he challenged humanity to take responsibility for creating meaning in the absence of divine authority. One of the most misunderstood concepts in Nietzsche's work is the Übermensch, often misinterpreted as Superman. Contrary to popular belief, this idea has nothing to do with racial supremacy or brute strength. Instead, the Übermensch represents a higher mode of human existence, someone who overcomes societal conditioning, embraces life's uncertainties, and creates their own values instead of relying on outdated moral systems. This is not a figure of domination, but of self-transformation, an individual who embodies artistic, intellectual, and psychological mastery. Nietzsche saw this as an alternative to both nihilism and blind faith in old traditions. Similarly, his idea of the will to power is widely misunderstood. Many assume it promotes a ruthless struggle for control, but Nietzsche never defined it as mere political or military power. Instead, he saw it as the fundamental drive of all life, the desire to grow, create, and expand one's influence in a meaningful way. In art, philosophy, science, and even personal development, the will to power manifests as the force behind human achievement and self-overcoming. For Nietzsche, true power was not about controlling others, but about mastering oneself. His critique of morality is another point of contention. Nietzsche did not argue that ethics should be abandoned. Rather, he questioned the origins of moral values and how they shape society. In On the Genealogy of Morals, he explored how traditional Christian values, meekness, humility, and self-sacrifice, emerged as a response to power structures rather than as absolute truths. He described this as slave morality, a system that encourages submission and resentment rather than strength and creativity. However, Nietzsche did not propose a world without morality. Instead, he urged individuals to develop their own values based on vitality, courage, and self-expression rather than inherited dogma. Nietzsche's perspectivism is another idea often reduced to an oversimplified claim that truth is relative. In reality, he argued that all knowledge is shaped by perspective and interpretation. This does not mean that all views are equally valid, but rather that understanding reality requires acknowledging multiple viewpoints. He warned against the illusion of absolute objectivity, advocating instead for intellectual humility and a willingness to challenge one's own assumptions. One of Nietzsche's most profound thought experiments is eternal recurrence, the idea that one should live as if they would have to repeat their life exactly as it is for eternity. While this was not meant as a literal metaphysical claim, it served as a test of life affirmation. Could you embrace existence so completely that you would will its endless repetition? This idea was Nietzsche's ultimate challenge, to live with such passion, creativity, and purpose that one would joyfully accept every moment of their life, even its struggles. Far from being a philosopher of destruction, Nietzsche sought to inspire a reevaluation of values in order to cultivate a richer, more meaningful existence. His work was not a rejection of morality or truth, but a call to rethink them, to move beyond passive acceptance and toward active engagement in the creation of meaning. Even though many people misunderstand Nietzsche, his ideas have had a huge impact on modern thinking. His challenges to traditional morality, truth, and human nature have influenced philosophy, psychology, and even the way we see society today. His work is still important because it helps us deal with big questions about meaning, power, and individuality. Nietzsche played a big role in shaping existentialism, a way of thinking that focuses on personal freedom and responsibility. Philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Martin Heidegger built on his ideas, especially his belief that we must create our own values instead of just following what society tells us. His thoughts on finding meaning in life, even when the world feels empty, also influenced Albert Camus, who explored the idea of the absurd, the struggle to make sense of life when it has no built-in purpose. His influence can also be seen in psychology. Before Sigmund Freud developed his theories about the unconscious mind, Nietzsche had already written about hidden desires and emotions shaping human behavior. Carl Jung's idea of individuation, the process of becoming a complete and independent person, has a lot in common with Nietzsche's idea of self-overcoming, which is about pushing past limits and growing into your full potential. Today, psychologists who study confidence, resilience, and personal growth are still working with ideas that Nietzsche explored over a century ago. Nietzsche's ideas also helped shape postmodernism, which questions whether absolute truth exists. Thinkers like Michel Foucault and Jacques Derrida used his idea of perspectivism, the belief that knowledge depends on perspective, to challenge the idea that there is only one correct way to see the world. Nietzsche also pointed out how language shapes the way we think, an idea that became very important in modern philosophy. Beyond philosophy and psychology, Nietzsche's ideas are still relevant in today's culture. His warning about the herd, people who follow the crowd without thinking for themselves, applies to social media culture, where people often seek approval rather than forming their own opinions. His description of the last man, someone who just wants an easy, comfortable life without deeper purpose, seems to predict modern consumer culture where entertainment and convenience often replace personal growth and deep thinking. Nietzsche's message is not one of hopelessness, but of possibility. He believed that life's struggles are what make us stronger and that we must take control of our own growth instead of relying on old ideas that no longer serve us. He didn't want people to lose their values. He wanted them to create better ones. The reason so many people dislike Nietzsche is often because they misunderstand him. He was not a supporter of cruelty or power for its own sake, nor did he believe in nothing. Instead, he wanted people to stop blindly following beliefs that no longer made sense, and instead build a life of strength, creativity, and meaning. His philosophy does not give easy answers, but it encourages us to ask important questions, to challenge ourselves, and to live life fully, on our own terms.